It was raining the night they took her. The sharp scent of wet dust clung to the wind as Amara clutched her mother's dupatta, her bare feet skidding in the mud. "Mama, please," she whispered, her voice breaking with confusion and fear, but her mother couldn't meet her eyes. Two men waited beside a rusted van, one lighting a cigarette, the other checking a wad of cash in his pocket. "Just do as they say," her father muttered from the shadows, shame burning behind his silence. Amara was 15. She didn't know the word for what was happening, but she understood betrayal when her mother pried her fingers off her arm and turned away, weeping into the folds of her shawl. Her world collapsed in a single moment, and with it, every warm memory she had of home. The van door slammed behind her. She wasn't a daughter anymore, she was a debt payment. Inside the brothel, the air was thick with sweat, perfume, and hopelessness. The madam, a woman with blood-red lipstick and eyes like razors, looked her up and down as if she were inspecting meat. "Too skinny," she spat. "But the eyes will sell." Amara stood frozen, arms crossed tight over her chest, trying to disappear inside her oversized clothes. Around her, girls with hollow faces and painted smiles moved like ghosts. One of them, older, maybe 20, slipped her a piece of roti under the table later that night and whispered, "Don't cry. Where they can see. They like it when you break." That was the first lesson Amara learned in her new life. Days blurred, nights bled. Her innocence, once wrapped in dreams of school, books, and laughter, now sat buried beneath neon lights and locked doors. But in the darkest corner of her heart, one tiny ember still burned. She didn't know what it was, maybe anger, maybe defiance. She only knew she would survive, somehow, even if it killed her. The first few weeks inside the brothel were a silent war between Amara's fear and her fading dignity. Each day began with the clang of buckets, the stale scent of sweat and incense, and the echo of women's laughter that never reached their eyes. She learned to keep her head down. The madam, known as Shireen, made it clear that obedience meant survival. "You are here to pay for your parents' sins," she said, tossing a cheap salwar kameez on Amara's bed. "Smile when the door opens. Cry after it closes." Amara refused. Not openly, no one defied Shireen and remained unscarred. But in the way she stared blankly at the men who came to see the girls, the way she sat in the corner refusing to paint her face like the others. "For now," Shireen allowed it. "Let her think she's strong," she said one night to a customer. "They all break eventually." It was in that place painted in cheap pink lights and despair that Amara met Zoya. Zoya was 19, with eyeliner that never smudged and a voice like broken glass. She had been sold at 13 and had long since buried her real name. "Don't make friends," she warned Amara, pressing a shared piece of paratha into her hand. "But if you must trust someone, make sure they're already dead inside." Yet somehow, their loneliness stitched a fragile bond. In stolen moments, they whispered dreams they no longer believed in, of escaping, of finding someone who would look at them like they mattered. Amara didn't dream of love. She dreamed of silence, of no knocks on the door, of a sky she could look at without walls. One night, everything changed. Amara was cleaning in the back when she heard raised voices, Shireen shouting, men panicking. Curious, she crept to the curtain and peeked. A man had entered the brothel, not like the others. He was tall, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that didn't belong in that world. His eyes scanned the room, not hungrily, but with quiet authority. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "A girl named Amara." Her breath caught. No one knew her real name. She hadn't told anyone, not even Zoya. Before Shireen could lie, his phone lit up. He turned the screen toward her. It was a photo of Amara, taken from years ago, smiling in her school uniform. That was the moment the brothel's rhythm changed. Shireen, for the first time, looked unsure. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cautious. The man placed a leather envelope on the counter. "My name is Rayan Khalid. I'm here to make an offer." That name sent whispers flying across the room. Rayan, the mysterious young billionaire who had vanished from the news after a scandal 5 years ago. Why would someone like him be looking for a girl buried in the shadows of the city? Shireen opened the envelope and stiffened. Inside was a signed check and a legal document with one sentence circled in red ink. The guardianship of Amara Ahmed shall be transferred upon signature. Amara didn't understand. She only understood the look on Shireen's face, fear. That night, Amara didn't sleep. Shireen didn't call her. The girls whispered, and Zoya stared at her like she was seeing her for the first time. Whatever this is, she whispered. Don't trust it too fast. Nobody saves girls like us, not without a price. Amara nodded, but in her heart, the ember she had buried flared into a fragile flame. Someone had come for her. Someone had remembered she was alive. And just like that, the first brick in her cage cracked. The next morning, the air in the brothel was different. Heavy and certain. The usual taunts and laughter were gone, replaced by a tension Amara could feel in her bones. Shireen hadn't spoken to her all night, and now, as the girls lined up for their daily routines, she simply motioned for Amara to follow. No words, just a flick of the wrist and eyes that no longer held their cruel confidence. Amara followed, in silence, her heart hammering with questions. She was led to a back room, a place she had only seen once, where Shireen met with special clients. But it wasn't a client waiting there. It was him. Rayan Khalid stood near the window, staring out at the trash-strewn alley below, hands in his pockets, as if he didn't quite belong in this world. When he turned to look at her, his eyes weren't soft, they were measured, intense, studying her like she was a riddle he wasn't sure how to solve. Do you know why I'm here? He asked. Amara shook her head. Because you don't belong here, he said quietly. Because you were sold for someone else's mistakes, and I need to fix that. She wanted to scream, to ask who he thought he was, swooping in with money and promises. But she had no voice. She hadn't used it in so long. So instead, she stood there, clutching her threadbare shawl, feeling like the walls around her were bending. Rayan reached into his coat and placed a folded paper on the table. You have a choice. This contract gives me temporary guardianship. You live in my estate under my care. There will be rules, privacy, security, freedom, not all at once, but enough to begin again. He paused. Or you can stay here. I won't force you. Shireen looked ready to protest. She opened her mouth, but Rayan's glance shut her down. Amara picked up the paper. She couldn't read all the words, but one line stood out. All debt forgiven upon agreement. Her breath hitched. Her parents' debt, the reason she was here. The chain around her neck. If she signed, it would be gone. Just like that. Her fingers trembled. She looked at Shireen, who was silent now. Then back at Rayan. She didn't trust him, not yet. But something about his presence felt different from the men she'd known. He wasn't looking at her like an object. He was waiting, respectfully, like she mattered. She signed. The drive to the estate felt unreal. The city melted into green hills and long roads. Amara pressed her forehead to the window, watching the world she hadn't seen in years rush past. She hadn't sat in a car since she was a child. She hadn't felt clean air in her lungs in so long, she almost cried. Rayan didn't speak, and she didn't ask questions. It was enough to just sit, to breathe, to hope. When they reached the mansion, it looked like something out of a story. Tall iron gates, long cobblestone drive, white walls with ivy crawling like veins across marble. A woman in a blazer opened the car door. This is Sarah, Rayan said. She's your counselor. She'll be with you as long as you need her. Amara stepped out, shoes crunching on gravel, unsure whether she was dreaming. Inside, everything smelled of lemon and lavender. Not sweat, not smoke, not fear. Sarah showed her to a room. Not a cellar room. With windows, real sheets, a closet full of clothes, a journal on the desk. This is yours, Sarah said gently. You're safe here. Amara nodded but didn't speak. Her body was still in defense mode, her mind unable to accept that safety was real. She sat on the bed and stared at her hands. They were shaking, from exhaustion, from disbelief. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her body, trained by trauma, waited for the door to open, for the voice, the footsteps, but they never came. Just silence. A soft wind outside. The hum of a distant generator. No knocks. No commands. Just the overwhelming quiet of freedom. But freedom, Amara was beginning to realize, could be terrifying when you've lived your whole life in chains. Amara woke before sunrise. The first thing she noticed was that no one had shaken her awake. No one had shouted orders or yanked her by the arm. There was no steel bucket of water hurled across the room, just golden light filtering through the sheer curtains, birds chirping faintly in the garden beyond her window. For a moment, she thought she had died. She sat up slowly, the crisp linen sheets wrinkling beneath her. The air smelled like jasmine. Her body was sore not from last night, but from a lifetime of being owned. On the bedside table, someone had placed a tray, toast, boiled eggs, and a glass of orange juice. Amara stared at it like it was a mirage. In the brothel, meals were scraps thrown in a communal bowl, and she often went days on nothing but tea. But here, this felt unreal. Still barefoot, she walked to the window. Beyond the garden, marble pathways wound through fruit trees and fountains. A gardener was trimming roses. The air was still cool. Amara pressed her fingers to the glass, as if touching freedom might confirm it. Sarah, the counselor, knocked gently and peeked in. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. "May I come in?" Amara nodded. No words, yet her voice still lived in chains. Sarah sat at the edge of the couch. "You don't need to talk until you're ready. We'll begin with small steps today. There's a private room downstairs, art therapy, reading, music, whatever you like. No one will touch you. No one will ask you anything you don't want to answer." Amara simply nodded again. She didn't know how to trust this. Kindness felt like a trick. Later, she followed Sarah through the quiet hallways of the estate. Every step felt surreal, her feet sinking into soft rugs, passing antique paintings, golden chandeliers overhead. She caught a glimpse of herself in one of the mirrors. Thin, pale, eyes that looked far older than her age. Hair tangled, scar near her collarbone still healing. She looked broken, but also alive. In the therapy room, Amara sat in a corner, knees pulled to her chest. Sarah placed a blank sketchbook and colored pencils on the table beside her. "If you don't feel like talking," Sarah said gently, "draw what you feel." Amara reached out slowly and picked up a pencil blue. The color of the sky, the color of oceans she had only seen in books. She didn't know what to draw. Her hands trembled, but she made a line, then another. It wasn't art. It wasn't beautiful, but it was hers. Later that afternoon, she saw Rayan again. He was in the garden, kneeling beside a broken bird bath, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands. Not the billionaire in a glass tower, just a man trying to fix something. When he noticed her watching from the window, he stood and nodded politely. No words, no expectation, just respect. That night, as she curled into bed, the fear returned. She stared at the ceiling for hours, afraid it was all temporary, that the brothel would call, that Shireen would knock and drag her back. But the door stayed closed, and for the first time in years, Amara fell asleep without fear. The days passed like soft rain, quiet, slow, and cleansing. For the first time in her life, Amara had the luxury of boredom. No sirens of fear, no trembling hands counting coins, no eyes on her body like she was property. Just silence and space. But silence had its own shadows. One afternoon, as she sat in the reading room flipping through a book she couldn't concentrate on, she looked up to see Rayan standing in the doorway. No suit today, just a charcoal sweater and black jeans, sleeves pushed to his elbows. He looked less like a billionaire and more like someone who'd been running from something too. "I wanted to see how you're settling in," he said, voice low, careful. She studied him, not with suspicion, but with the distant curiosity of someone trying to understand why a storm cloud might offer shelter. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice dry from disuse but steady. He leaned against the bookshelf, hands in his pockets. "Because I couldn't sleep after I saw you in that place," he said. "And because money is useless if you can't save someone with it." Amara's throat tightened. That word save made her feel weak and angry at the same time. She didn't want to be someone's rescue mission. "I didn't ask you to save me," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I came with an offer, not a favor." She blinked. "Offer?" Rayan nodded. "A job. Not out of pity, but because I've read your file. You were top of your class in school, until your father sold your scholarship for a debt. You were fluent in English at 13. You read philosophy. You wanted to study law." Amara looked away. Her throat burned. "There's a position in my legal department," he continued. "Paid internship. You'd start with training part-time. No pressure. If you want it. She laughed suddenly. It came out sharp, painful. A whore in a billionaire's law firm? That's your offer? Rayan didn't flinch. A survivor in a suit, he said. That's what I see. Her eyes shimmered. Not with gratitude. Not yet, but with the ache of someone beginning to believe the ground beneath her might hold. He didn't push. He simply placed a small leather folder on the coffee table. Details, contracts, resources. Then he walked out. Quietly, like he knew freedom couldn't be handed over, it had to be chosen. That night, Amara opened the folder and read every word. Twice. By dawn, she'd made her decision. If she was going to reclaim her life, it wouldn't be in whispers. It would be loud, with purpose, with fire. She was done surviving. Now, she would rise. The sun hadn't yet risen when Amara walked down the mansion's stone steps and entered the East Wing Rayan's private office building. The silence of dawn echoed through the halls, but she didn't feel small anymore. The folder in her hand felt heavier than gold, and more dangerous than any weapon she'd ever carried. It held her second chance. An assistant greeted her at the glass door, surprised to see her so early. Miss Amara? The woman asked, standing. Mr. Rayan said you might come by. I'm here for the internship, Amara said, her voice calm, almost steady. Soon, she was led into a training room where 3 other interns dressed sharply, with polished resumes and clean histories, looked at her with curious eyes. They didn't know who she was. Not really. Not yet. But their gazes made her shoulders tighten. She sat quietly, absorbing everything: the codes, the corporate structure, the expectations. The law firm under Rayan's company wasn't just elite, it was cutthroat. Her first assignment was to review a contract worth millions. The weight of it almost paralyzed her. But as the minutes turned into hours, she found her breath steadying. Her mind, though rusty, was sharp. She could see loopholes no one else mentioned. By noon, she had rewritten the entire clause with better protections for their client. When her supervisor saw it, his eyes narrowed. Where did you study? He asked. I didn't, she replied. But I studied life. Word spread. That night, Rayan found her in the mansion's study, her fingers buried in a legal handbook, lips moving silently as she translated unfamiliar terms. You're serious about this, he said gently. She looked up, eyes glowing not with gratitude, but with ambition. I've wasted enough years hiding. If you're offering me a way out, I'm taking it. But not just to survive. I want more. Rayan nodded slowly. Then you'll get it. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual chaos, unaware that a girl they once buried in shame was rising. Not as a trophy, not as a victim, but as a woman who knew the price of her own soul and refused to be sold again. Weeks passed, and Amara's place within the company solidified not by privilege, but by proof. Every morning she rose before the staff. Every night she stayed up long after the mansion lights dimmed. Her body ached. Her mind swirled with legal codes, contracts, and clauses, but she never let the weight slow her. Yet success came with whispers. Not everyone in Rayan's empire welcomed her ascent. Some saw her as an outsider, a charity case. Others saw something more dangerous, potential. One evening, while retrieving files from the archive floor, Amara overheard 2 senior associates talking in hushed tones. She's getting too close, one muttered. You know what she was, right? She doesn't belong here. She has Rayan's ear. If she messes up this merger, it's on all of us. That night, Amara stood before her mirror, brushing her hair back as her reflection stared back with sharp eyes. Her face was the same, still gentle, still young, but behind it pulsed something colder, stronger. The girl who once wept in the shadows of the brothel was gone. In her place stood someone with purpose. But even as she climbed, ghosts whispered from behind her. She hadn't told Rayan about the letter. A letter had arrived 2 days ago, with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Her mother, frail, sitting outside a medical clinic somewhere far, maybe even across the border, and a note scribbled in hurried, unfamiliar ink. She's not well. She's asking for you. Amara folded the photo back into her drawer and locked it away. She couldn't afford to look back, not now, not when she was this close. But that night, she dreamed of home, of that damp room with peeling walls, of her mother coughing softly into the night, whispering her name. Amara, forgive us. She woke up in tears, fists clenched. Power had a cost, and every day she paid it in silence. But the real test hadn't begun yet, because as dawn broke over the city, Rain summoned her to the penthouse floor. Not for paperwork, not for a lesson, but for a deal that would change everything. Amara stood at the entrance of the penthouse floor, her heels quiet against the black marble tiles. She had been summoned by Rain at dawn, his message brief. Come immediately. Bring no one. When the doors opened, the air inside felt different, thicker, as if the walls had absorbed secrets too heavy to hold. Rain stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit by the golden blush of morning light, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a leather folder. Without turning, he said, "Do you trust me, Amara?" The question caught her off guard. After everything, after rescuing her from that hell, after giving her a place, a purpose, how could she say no? "I don't know," she said carefully, "but I'm trying." He turned to her slowly, his face unreadable, eyes calculating. "Then you'll read this." She took the folder. Inside was a contract, detailed, dense, and stamped with the seal of a private investment firm she'd never heard of. Her eyes skimmed the clauses. A proposed acquisition, shares to be shifted discreetly through shadow investors, and most shocking of all, her name listed as a silent partner. This gives me legal stake in the holding company," she whispered. "Rayan, why me?" He leaned forward. "Because they're coming after me." Amara's breath caught. Rayan explained. An international competitor had begun circling his empire like vultures. They were leveraging old debts, tracking every vulnerable angle, and he needed someone invisible, someone who could act beneath the radar, whose hands were clean and eyes sharp. "You're not just a girl I helped, Amara. You're the one person in this house who hasn't lied to me. I know what they say about you behind closed doors. Let them. You're the only one I trust with this." Her fingers trembled around the folder. "If I sign this, I become a target." "You already are," he said, and for a moment the billionaire didn't look invincible. He looked tired. A silence fell. Then, slowly, Amara pulled a pen from her coat. She stared at the signature line, hesitating only briefly before writing her name in smooth, steady ink. "I'm with you," she said. Rayan took the folder, closed it, and nodded. "Good, because once we begin, there's no turning back." As she left the penthouse, her phone buzzed. One message, a known number. "We know what you did. And so does your mother." Her heart slammed. The past hadn't just followed her. It had arrived. Amara stared at the message on her phone, her pulse pounding in her ears. "We know what you did. And so does your mother." The words blinked back at her like a curse. Her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year, not since the day she was sold like a worthless object and vanished into the underbelly of the city. That woman had signed the papers herself, hadn't even looked Amara in the eyes. Why now? She stepped into the elevator, the doors closing her in, her reflection fractured in the polished steel walls. Had her mother reached out? Or had someone found her? What did they mean by what you did? She had survived, escaped, fought back. That's what she did. And now she was being punished again for surviving. The elevator dinged open and Zara was standing there waiting, arms crossed, a smirk on her face like she already knew something. "Rough morning?" she asked, walking past Amara without waiting for a reply. "Mr. Khan's been unusually protective of you lately. I wonder why." Amara ignored her, but the words stung. She didn't need more enemies within these walls. She needed allies fast. She made her way to the office Rayan had quietly given her on the third floor, tucked behind layers of security and rarely visited. She locked the door behind her, turned off her phone, and booted up the secure laptop he'd handed her last night after she signed the contract. Within seconds, she was inside the firm's private archives. Names, files, bank accounts, and a list of those watching Rayan's empire closely. One name jumped out. Victor Almasi. She clicked. A dozen red-flagged reports opened. Almasi Enterprises, Balkan arms dealing, human trafficking allegations, shell corporations in Dubai, Singapore, and Karachi. And one chilling detail: Almasi had recently purchased the same brothel she was once imprisoned in. Amara's stomach turned. She reached for the encrypted line and called Rayan. I know who sent the message, she said without greeting. Rayan's voice was quiet but urgent. Tell me. Victor Almasi. He owns the place now. And he knows who I am. A long pause. Then this just got more dangerous, he said. We need to leave the city. Pack only what you need. I'll send a jet. But my mother, Amara started but stopped. Her loyalty was bleeding. In too many directions. Rayan's voice dropped. If you stay, they'll use her to get to you. And if you fall, everything we're building collapses. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. I understand, she said softly. He paused. You're not alone anymore, Amara. I won't let them hurt you again. The line went dead. And for the first time in years, Amara wasn't just running from something. She was preparing to fight back. The sky was still dark when Amara stood on the rooftop helipad of Rayan's penthouse, the city glittering below like broken glass. A soft wind tugged at her coat as she waited, heart hammering against her chest. Below her, the world she once knew one of death, betrayal, and suffocating silence was quickly unraveling. Now, everything was changing at a pace she could barely keep up with. A sleek black helicopter approached, its blades slicing through the night with mechanical grace. Rayan emerged from the stairwell moments later, dressed in all black, his expression unreadable but his eyes locked onto hers. Without a word, he guided her into the helicopter. The cabin was silent save for the roar of blades and the low hum of urgency in the air between them. As they lifted off, Amara watched the city shrink beneath her. Somewhere down there, Victor Almasi was making moves. Somewhere down there, her mother who hadn't protected her once was still living, possibly in danger. And here she was, running again. But this time, with Rayan at her side, it didn't feel like surrender. They landed on a private airstrip. An hour later, where a sleek jet waited under discreet lights, Rayan led her aboard, and as they settled into leather seats, he finally spoke. You're angry. Amara met his gaze. I'm scared. That man Almasi, he owns the place where I was kept. How does someone like that come to own everything without the world noticing? Rayan poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. Because the world looks away, Amara, until someone forces them to see. She sipped in silence. He continued, Almasi isn't just an arms dealer. He launders money through charities, sponsors political campaigns, buries the truth in paperwork and fear. I've been trying to dismantle his network for years. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't know he had a connection to you. Until now. But maybe that's fate working in our favor. Her eyes narrowed. Fate? You think this is fate? Rayan leaned forward, intensity in every syllable. I think we both have scars shaped by the same monster. And I think together, we might finally be strong enough to destroy him. There was a pause between them, long, heavy, honest. Then Amara asked, what's the plan? He slid a folder toward her. Inside were names, bank accounts, photos, evidence of Almasi's hidden empire. This is where we begin, he said. Amara traced her fingers over a photo of Almasi shaking hands with a smiling politician. She took a deep breath. The fear still there, but something else had settled inside her too. Purpose. She looked at Rayan. I'm in. And just like that, she crossed a line from survival to rebellion. They were no longer running. They were coming for war. The jet descended into Zurich under a pale gray sky. As the wheels touched the runway, Amara felt her pulse quicken. Switzerland, the land of silent banks and hidden fortunes, this was where Victor Almasi kept his cleanest secrets. Rayan's plan was already in motion. But with each step they took into Almasi's world, the closer they came to something far more dangerous than either of them expected. In the car from the airport, Rayan handed her a sleek black phone with encrypted messages. We're meeting an old associate of mine, someone who used to work for Almasi's financial network. He's agreed to talk. Amara scanned the name on the screen. Gabriel Novak. Why would he help us? Rayan's eyes flicked to the window. Because Almasi killed his sister. Just like he almost destroyed you. People don't forget. They pulled up to a discreet cafe near the lake. Gabriel was already waiting, a weary man with sunken eyes and a coat too large for his narrow frame. His hands trembled as he shook theirs. Make it quick, he said. Almasi has eyes even in shadows. Inside a private booth, Gabriel opened a small metal case and slid across a drive. This holds every offshore transfer in the last 5 years. Bribes, shell companies, blackmail payouts. But there's something else. He's been watching her. He nodded toward Amara. She froze. Watching me? Gabriel nodded. Since you escaped the brothel, he tracked you all the way to Dubai. The charity gala? That wasn't chance. He wanted you close to bait Rayan. Amara's hands clenched. So I'm a pawn again. Rayan's voice cut in sharp and low. No, you're the key. That night, in the safe house above the city, Amara sat by the fire, flipping through the files Gabriel gave them. Photos of herself she never knew existed. Conversations recorded. Transaction logs under aliases she never heard of, but one stood out. Her own mother's name. She stared. Lips parted. Why is my mother's name on this? Rayan came to her side, jaw tight. She took a payment 10 years ago from Almasi's foundation. Under the table, Amara's eyes filled with tears. She sold me. This whole time, I thought she had no choice. She did, Rayan whispered, and she made the wrong one. Silence engulfed the room. Amara didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she stood and stared out the window at the snow-dusted city. Then it's settled, she said, quietly. I'm not just taking him down. I'm taking everyone who helped him. Her reflection in the glass looked different now, harder, wiser, unafraid. Rayan stepped beside her. We start tomorrow. Zurich is just the beginning. She nodded, fire in her eyes. Then let it burn. The car climbed the steep road to Victor Almasi's secluded alpine estate, its iron gates looming like silent sentinels against the falling snow. From a distance, the mansion looked peaceful, like something from a fairy tale. But Amara knew better now. Nothing beautiful was ever innocent in Almasi's world. Rayan adjusted the earpiece in his ear as the vehicle rolled to a stop behind a delivery truck. Final check, he whispered. Your mic is hot. Our signal's clear. This ends tonight. Amara nodded, her breath visible in the cold air. Dressed as a logistics consultant, she stepped out with practiced grace. The guards barely glanced at her forged ID. She was no longer the girl from the brothel. They couldn't even see her past the designer coat and clipboard. Inside, the mansion was a cathedral of power. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, tall mirrors that reflected wealth and concealed sins. And everywhere cameras. She moved quickly, locating the private server room with Rayan's directions. Her hands didn't tremble as she connected the drive Gabriel had given them. The files would upload directly to journalists and investigators around the world, untraceable, irreversible, a reckoning encoded in kilobytes. Then came the voice. You're bolder than I expected, said Almasi, stepping out of the shadows like a ghost returning home. He looked older now, his hair grayer, his face more cruel than regal. But you always were a wild card. Amara turned slowly, hiding nothing. You've ruined lives. You've taken everything from me. And now it's your turn. Almasi laughed, low and bitter. You think truth matters? The world doesn't care about victims, it only remembers victors. Then I'll be both, she whispered. Before he could move, Rayan burst in from the side hallway, gun raised. Step away, Victor. It's over. But Almasi smiled. No, Rayan, it never ends. Not for people like us. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A blast from the east wing shook the foundation. Rayan's backup team had triggered the decoy explosives. Amara took the moment, slamming the upload button. It's done, she breathed. Everything you've hidden is gone. Almasi's eyes blazed with fury. You will regret this. But Amara stepped closer, meeting him eye to eye. I already did. Every day. But today, I finally stopped. Sirens wailed in the valley below as authorities closed in. Almasi's empire, once untouchable, was unraveling piece by piece, lie by lie. Rayan took her hand. It's time. As they exited through the back tunnel into the mountain woods, snow falling gently on their shoulders, Amara didn't look back. She didn't need to, because the girl who had been sold, used, and discarded was gone. What remained was a woman forged in fire and frost. And she was just getting started. 3 weeks had passed since the mansion burned and the truth exploded across the world's screens. The Almasi Empire was collapsing, its roots exposed like a diseased tree. Trafficking, bribery, child exploitation. Amara's face was everywhere, though half the world still didn't know her real name. She sat quietly in a stone garden outside a hidden monastery in southern France. The silence was new, uncomfortable. After years of chaos, justice, and revenge, peace didn't feel like victory, it felt like grief. Rayan approached with soft steps. He no longer wore his shoulder holster. For the first time in years, his hands weren't trembling. Interpol froze his accounts in Zurich, he said, setting a file beside her. The ones used for transport routes. They also found more names. Amara didn't look up. How many? Dozens. Some are girls still missing. She exhaled sharply, tears welling but never falling. It never ends. No, he agreed. But now, we're on the offense. The wind moved the monastery's prayer flags like whispers of memory. Amara thought of Noor, the girl who never made it out. Of Auntie Dahlia who screamed until her lungs gave. Of the bruised girls in small rooms who never saw daylight. What if I don't want to fight anymore? She whispered. What if I just want to rest? Rayan crouched beside her. Then rest. You've earned it. But don't forget what you did. Shook the world. You gave millions a voice. And that matters. She looked at him, then really looked. The boy who had fought beside her, bled beside her, nearly died to help her rewrite the story. He was not just her protector anymore. He was her witness. Did you ever wonder, she asked slowly, what life would have been like if we'd met before all this? His smile was soft, wistful. I used to. Now I realize we met exactly when we were supposed to. Because only this version of us could survive what we did. Their hands brushed. Not lovers yet, but something deeper, soul survivors. Suddenly, the monastery bell rang once. A signal. A message had arrived. Amara stood and opened the envelope handed to her by a silent monk. Inside was a single line. They're rebuilding in Tangier. The girls are younger, the buyers richer. She stared at the words. Not again. Not them. Rayan looked over her shoulder. What do you want to do? Amara's voice was cold steel wrapped in velvet. We're going hunting. And just like that, rest would have to wait. The Tangier docks smelled of salt, rust, and secrets. As dusk fell across the Moroccan port city, Amara stepped off the ferry dressed in plain gray linen, her long hair hidden beneath a scarf. Rayan followed, his eyes scanning every shadow. They hadn't spoken much since the letter. There was no need. The mission was the language they both understood best. They weren't alone this time. Behind them trailed Yasmin, rescued from Cairo, now fluent in 5 languages and lethal with a dagger. And Karim, Rayan's contact from the old military days, who could forge a new identity in 10 minutes and vanish in 5. Amara had changed, not just in how she moved, but in how she breathed. There was still pain in her silence, but now it had purpose. They met their informant in an abandoned riad near the Medina, a boy no older than 14 with hollow cheeks and cigarette burns on his wrists. His name was Ali. He spoke like he'd lived 3 lifetimes. They're holding them in the old customs building, he whispered, at the edge of the port. No signs outside, no windows, but every night, black cars come and go. The girls, they don't come back out. Amara knelt to his level. Do they hurt you? He didn't answer. His eyes did. She pressed a bracelet into his hand. A GPS tracker. If anything happens to you, run to the square. Tap this 3 times. We'll find you. Ali nodded. That night, they waited. The port was quiet except for the occasional creak of steel hulls and the murmur of the sea. Through binoculars, Amara watched as a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the alley. 2 men emerged, white suits, gold chains, and arrogance. The kind who thought the world owed them innocence to destroy. Then the van came. It was old, dented, unmarked. But Amara knew the sound, the rattling engine of every girl's nightmare. She reached for her earpiece. Target confirmed. Operation Dawnlight is green. Yasmin and Karim slipped around the east wall. Rayan positioned himself near the power grid. Amara crept toward the loading dock, silent as breath. Inside the building, screams echoed, soft, muffled, and raw. Amara clenched her fists. This wasn't a rescue. This was war. Rayan's voice came through the coms. Ready when you are. Amara took one final breath. Then she whispered, cut the lights. Darkness swallowed the building. Chaos erupted, and Amara charged forward, a phantom born of fury and hope. The warehouse exploded into chaos the moment the lights died. Gunfire crackled in the dark. Wild and panicked, screams pierced the thick air as the guards fired blindly, their eyes still adjusting to sudden blackness. Rayan had timed it perfectly, cutting the main generator from the outside and plunging every corridor into pitch silence, pitch darkness. Amara didn't wait. She moved like smoke, fast, silent, and impossible to catch. With night vision goggles strapped to her eyes and a dagger in her palm, she ducked low through the crates and wire cages, heading straight for the sound of the girls. Yasmin was already inside, taking down a guard near the back door with swift precision, while Kareem disabled the security cams one by one. They had 6 minutes before backup arrived. She found them 4 girls, no older than 12, shackled together in a locked holding cell. They looked up as she approached, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Amara tore off her goggles and dropped to her knees, her voice breaking softly. "You're safe now, I promise." But one girl, the smallest, shook her head. "No, there's more. Below. The basement." Amara's blood ran cold. There hadn't been any intel on a basement. She grabbed the cell keys from the fallen guard and unlocked the door. "Run to the alley. Yasmin's waiting for you. Tell her I said Olive Moon. She'll know." The girls hesitated only for a heartbeat, then ran. Amara turned toward the far end of the room, where a rusted steel door marked maintenance stood partially ajar. She kicked it open. Stairs led downward into silence. Her flashlight flickered as she descended. The air grew colder, more damp. A low humming sound echoed below. Generators, maybe, or machines. Then she saw it. A lab, not just a trafficking hub. This was something else. A clinic, for drips, stretchers, paperwork scattered across tables, medical records, photographs, blood tests, and at the center of it all an operating table and a camera. Amara's hand trembled as she picked up a clipboard. Dozens of girls, each with a file, most marked unsuitable. Some had red stamps across them. Sold, transferred, missing. She heard footsteps above, reinforcements. She grabbed as many files as she could and bolted back up the stairs. At the top, Rayan was waiting, his rifle trained on 2 new guards who had just arrived, one bleeding from a shoulder wound, the other frozen mid-step. Kareem called in the extraction van. Yasmin herded the rescued girls out of the alley and into the vehicle. They had only seconds to spare. Amara slid into the passenger seat, breathing hard, heart pounding. As the van pulled away from the scene, sirens roared behind them. She looked down at the file in her hands and froze. The photograph stapled to the top her. A younger her. Same eyes, same scars, same file number as the one tattooed behind her left shoulder blade. This wasn't just a trafficking ring. It was the same network that had sold her years ago. And she hadn't escaped it. She had just circled back to the beginning. The van raced through the sleeping city, its tires humming like a warning against the silence they carried. Amara sat stiffly in the front seat, the file folder trembling in her hands. Rain lashed against the windshield like fingers trying to claw their way in. In her lap, her own photo stared back at her, cold, clinical, detached. A number in the corner, a barcode. The file dated back 10 years. Rayan, glancing at her pale face, spoke softly. "What is it?" Amara didn't answer. At first, she couldn't. Her voice was somewhere buried beneath the rubble of a decade of pain. She stared at the name of the doctor listed on the file, Dr. Alim Qureshi. The name meant nothing to Rayan, but to Amara, it was the ghost in every nightmare, the voice behind every injection, the man who had bought her silence with syringes and shadows. "They ran experiments," she whispered, "on us. Some of the girls were just sold. Others, they were studied." Yasmin turned around from the back seat, her eyes wide. "What kind of experiments?" Amara flipped to the second page. "Behavioral control, sterility trials, fertility tracking, genetic mapping. They wanted to learn which girls would breed the most profitable offspring. It wasn't just trafficking, it was eugenics." Kareem swore under his breath. Rain's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Who funded this?" Amara pulled another sheet from the file. A letterhead, clean, expensive. An international go publicly known for female empowerment campaigns. The irony scraped like rust across her mind. "Lasher Holdings," she said. "They funded the lab. And the same name is on the deed of the mansion." Yasmin blinked. "The one you live in?" Amara nodded. It wasn't a gift, she murmured. It was a cage with a view. Rayan slowed the van near a gas station on the city's outskirts. He turned the engine off. Everyone sat in the silence that followed, too stunned to speak. Amara slowly got out and stood beneath the flickering station light. Rain soaked through her hoodie, cold and sharp. She didn't care. She held the file close to her chest, like a part of her she couldn't tear off anymore. She realized now, the billionaire didn't save her. He bought her, but not for what she thought. She wasn't a lover. She wasn't even a pawn. She was evidence, the final piece of a horrific puzzle. The rain had stopped by morning, but the storm hadn't. Not inside Amara. She sat in the small safe house Rayan had arranged, an abandoned apartment above a closed bookstore near the river. The windows were boarded, the walls peeling, and yet it felt safer than the mansion ever had. Yasmin brewed instant coffee in the corner. Kareem sat at the table with maps and documents spread before him, and Rayan hadn't said a word since they'd arrived. Amara stood at the window, staring at the sliver of daylight between the wood slats, and finally broke the silence. I want to go back. Rayan turned. What? I want to go back to the mansion, she said, her voice calm but steady. There's something in his office, something I need to see. You want to walk into the lion's den again? Kareem asked, incredulous. Amara nodded. Now that I know what I'm looking for, I'll find it. Yasmin handed her a mug. You think there's proof? I think there's more. Amara said, I think the mansion wasn't just where he brought me, it's where they planned it all. The papers, the files, the funding. It wasn't an accident that I ended up in that house. It was orchestrated. Rayan finally spoke. You don't need to do this. We can expose them without putting you back in danger. No, Amara said quietly. Not half-truths, not whispers. I want it all out in the light. And so they made a plan. By nightfall, Amara stood once again in front of the mansion that had once felt like a fairy tale. Now it loomed like a monument to betrayal. Rayan waited with the van around the corner, ready to intercept if things went wrong. Yasmin fed instructions through a hidden earpiece. Kareem had hacked the security system for a 2-minute window. The front door creaked open. The air inside still smelled like roses and lavender, but it was cloying now, sickly artificial. She slipped through the hallway, her heart pounding. The study was where she remembered it. She pushed open the double doors. The room was untouched. Books lined the shelves. A decanter of whiskey sat on the sideboard, and the desk, the ornate mahogany one, was the same place where she'd once seen him reviewing papers late into the night. She moved quickly now. She pulled open drawers, flipped through folders, and then at the bottom a locked panel. She pried it open with a letter opener. Inside were USB drives, labeled with dates, names, videos, evidence. She stuffed them into her coat and turned to leave and froze. He stood in the doorway, the billionaire, tall, impeccably dressed, his eyes calm, but his hands clenched. I was wondering when you'd remember, he said softly. Amara's voice caught in her throat. You were part of it. I built it, he said, and you were my masterpiece. The weight of his words sent a chill down her spine. But she didn't run. Not this time, because in her coat pocket were the pieces of the truth. And in her eyes burned something stronger than fear. Revenge. Amara stood frozen as his words echoed in the grand study, every syllable like a knife twisting deeper into her chest. You were my masterpiece. His voice was smooth, measured. The voice of a man who believed he still held all the power. But something had shifted. Amara wasn't the frightened girl he had groomed anymore. She was fire in human form, lit by betrayal, forged by pain. You watch me suffer, she said slowly, her voice trembling but unbroken. You caged me like an exhibit, and you called it love? He stepped forward, hands in his pockets, perfectly calm. It was never about love, Amara. It was about control. You were the symbol, the one who proved we could mold anyone into anything. And you played your part beautifully. She took a step back toward the desk, her fingers tightening around the hidden USBs in her pocket. Her mind raced. She needed to stall until Rayan and Yasmin got the signal. You were right, she said quietly. I did play the part. I smiled. I'm bait. But while you watched me through your cameras and smug speeches, you forgot one thing. What's that? He asked, still amused. I was always watching back. She pressed the hidden button on her earpiece. Outside, Rayan's voice crackled to life in her ear, We're coming in. 30 seconds. The billionaire's expression changed subtly the first crack in his porcelain mask. What did you do? I took back the story, Amara whispered. You thought you were the narrator, but I'm the author now. Suddenly, the mansion's power flickered. The lights died, plunging the room into darkness. From the hallway, footsteps thundered. Kareem's voice roared. Security. Hands where I can see them. The billionaire spun, stunned. The doors burst open. Yasmin, Kareem, and Rayan stormed in, their presence overwhelming the once untouchable man. Amara didn't move. She watched as he was dragged to his knees. For a moment, he looked up at her not with anger, but with disbelief. You were supposed to break, he whispered. I did, she said, stepping into the light, her face calm and fierce. And then I rebuilt myself without you. Outside, blue and red lights flashed as police cars lined the street. Cameras, journalists, activists all waiting to hear what really went on behind the gates of the billionaire's mansion. Amara stepped outside, her coat clutched tightly around her, the USB drive safe inside. The rain had stopped, and dawn was beginning to break. For the first time in years, she breathed. Not as a prisoner, not as a symbol, but as a survivor. The next morning, the world knew her name. News outlets across the country carried the story of the girl once sold into darkness who now stood as the face of a powerful reckoning. Amara's image, eyes steady, jaw firm, flashed on every screen. The expos she released, with the help of Rayan and Yasmin, had gone viral overnight. Hidden recordings, financial ledgers, surveillance footage all laid bare. The billion-dollar empire built on manipulation and exploitation was crumbling, brick by brick. But Amara didn't feel victorious. She sat on the edge of a hospital bed beside a young girl barely 16 rescued during one of the late-night raids sparked by the investigation. Her hand gently held the girl's trembling fingers. You're safe now, Amara whispered. No one will hurt you again. The girl looked at her, eyes hollow but curious. Are you an angel? Amara smiled, brushing the girl's hair back. No, but I used to be where you are. That night, as Amara walked through the shelter filled with rescued girls, she felt a haunting weight settle in her chest. Every story, every tear, it was her own story multiplied. And though she had escaped, thousands hadn't. Rayan found her on the rooftop of the building, staring at the city lights. You haven't slept, he said gently, handing her a cup of tea. Neither have you, she replied with a tired smile. They stood in silence for a while. Then he asked, What now, Amara? You exposed him. The world knows the truth. You could disappear, start fresh. She turned to him, eyes burning with quiet fire. I don't want to disappear. I want to fight. He nodded. Then I'm with you, always. The following week, Amara took the podium at a women's rights summit. The auditorium was packed, survivors, advocates, lawmakers. Her voice was steady, her message sharp. This isn't just my story, she said. It's the story of every girl who was silenced, bought, and broken. We will build homes. We will change laws. And we will not let them forget what they did. Thunderous applause echoed. After the speech, as the audience stood in ovation, Amara glanced at the back of the room where Yasmin and Kareem stood proud, and Rain smiled at her like she had become the lighthouse he always knew she was. But far away, in a cold prison cell, the man who once called her a masterpiece watched a broadcast from a small TV screen. His empire was gone, his wealth seized, his name now reviled. Still, he watched her with a strange calm. And then, he whispered, You think it's over, Amara, but the game has just changed. 3 months had passed since the world learned the truth. The court proceedings had begun, and hundreds of men connected to the underground syndicate had been arrested. Amara, now a national symbol of strength and resistance, spent her days coordinating shelters, giving talks, and building the foundation of her non-profit organization, The Light Within. But peace hadn't truly found her. Each night, memories returned, the scent of the brothel's corridors, the sound of chains, the whisper of deals being made over her body. Her past clung like a second skin. No amount of applause or public praise could silence those ghosts. Rayan noticed it. The way she stared into nothingness. The way she sometimes flinched at kindness. One night, as rain poured on the city, he walked into her study and found her curled on the floor, holding one of the rescued girl's drawings, a girl with chains on her wrists, standing beside a glowing heart. "I don't know how to be free," Amara whispered through tears. "Even now, it doesn't feel real." Rayan knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "Freedom isn't a place, Amara. It's a decision. You chose to fight back, to speak when you had every reason to stay silent. That's what freedom is." She looked at him, searching. "And love?" "Love," he said softly, "is what reminds you you're still human." For the first time in years, Amara let herself fall into someone's arms, not out of fear or survival, but because she wanted to be held. And in that embrace, the walls around her heart finally began to break. Part 20. From Ashes to Light. A year later, the mansion that once imprisoned her had been turned into a shelter and rehabilitation center. The same halls that echoed with her silent screams now rang with the laughter of girls learning to live again. Amara stood before a crowd of former victims, staff, and press on the opening day of Ashagar, the House of Hope. Behind her, a plaque bore the words, "In memory of every girl who wasn't saved in time." As she began her speech, her voice no longer trembled. "I was sold for a price, but I chose to live without one. Today, we reclaim every inch of space that was used to destroy us and turn it into sanctuary." Cheers erupted. The girls in the front row stood up and clapped, their eyes gleaming with tears and pride. Later that evening, Amara sat under a tree in the courtyard, her eyes closed as wind brushed her face. Yasmin joined her, smiling. "You know," Yasmin said, "you're not just a survivor anymore. You're a revolution." Amara smiled. "No, I'm just a girl who decided to stop running." Rain approached with 2 cups of chai and handed one to her. "The world can be dark, but your light, it reached further than you'll ever know." She sipped her tea, gazing at the stars above the same sky she had stared at from a barred window years ago, dreaming of freedom. And finally, she felt it. Not the echo of her past, but the stillness of healing, the embrace of peace, and the beginning of a life truly lived. Fade out. She was born into poverty, sold for a debt she never owed, imprisoned in silence, and stripped of her choices. But Amara did not remain a victim. She rose, with scars that told stories, with a voice that shook empires, and with a heart that chose compassion over vengeance. She transformed pain into purpose. This is not just her story. It's the story of every girl forced into the shadows, and every soul who dared to believe in light. Because in a world that tried to break her, she didn't just survive. She changed everything. And that is how she found her freedom.